one of the things that I find such an eye-opening kind of mass-dropping moment is what happened with TikTok. And I saw you mention this too. I've been covering this from the start. I knew this was going to happen. A lot, when the ban on TikTok was first announced, the rationale was we can't have the Chinese controlling the algorithm that shapes the views of young Americans. And that went nowhere in Washington. That was 2020. It didn't get anywhere near the approval it needed in Congress. The Biden administration abandoned it. Nobody cared. It was only after October 7th when Democratic members of Congress became convinced that it was because of TikTok that the young generation was turning against Israel, did they suddenly decide, oh my God, we have to do something about TikTok. And the ADL came out and said, we must ban this or we must capture it. And the ADL even went to Israel, Jonathan Greenblatt, and said, capturing TikTok is at least as important as capturing the land dominated by Hezbollah and Hamas. And then, of course, a month later, Congress does ban TikTok on those orders. And then suddenly, after 9 months, Trump finds a way to sell it, not just to Trump allies, but to the largest single donor to the IDF, which is Larry Ellison, whose only cause in life is Israel. And so it seems clear to me that you don't need much conspiratorial thinking to see that each one of these issues is ultimately driven by that same topic, despite the effort to say, oh, you're obsessed with Israel. When I see members of Congress going every week to Israel and passing resolutions every week for Israel and giving all American money to Israel and fighting wars for Israel and giving TikTok to Israeli interests, I don't think it's me who's obsessed with Israel. I think it's the people in power. And along those lines, I wanted to ask you about Turning Point, which is obviously a very well-funded and now more powerful than ever organization in American politics, especially among American youth, given the martyrdom of Charlie Kirk and everything else. And it is obviously now a question of who's going to run Turning Point. And, if you go back a month ago before Charlie Kirk was killed, you saw a lot of these Israel fanatics like Laura Loomer. I'm not sure if Ben Shapiro said anything, but his crowd, a lot of them were, trying to eject Charlie Kirk from good standing because he had a debate on Israel with Dave Smith, and then he invited Tucker to speak, knowing Tucker was going to bash Israel, and Tucker spent half his speech talking about Epstein as a Mossad agent and how the government is trying to cover that up. And people were infuriated with him and felt like Turning Point was in danger for the agenda for which it was set up, which is to serve Israel. And now you see Ben Shapiro suddenly appearing on the Charlie Kirk show and announcing millions of dollars in donation to Turning Point. As you pointed out, Erica Kirk, despite knowing not much about her, is assuming this leadership role. And the kind of question is, who is she and what are her influences? What do you see as going on now with the attempt to, now that Charlie Kirk isn't running Turning Point, to make sure that Turning Point stays in the hands of a very reliable person or group of people who are loyal to the Israel agenda that its funders demand?
Well, they're already swarming. Like you said, Bill Ackman came in right away after Charlie died with $1 million as a reward for information about the killer. Sean McGuire from Sequoia came in and said Charlie Kirk's family is set for life. Andrew Colvett, who is this PR guy at Turning Point, he's sort of been the spokesman. He was the producer on the show. He's got a very interesting background. He comes from this PR company, and he was working with Marissa Straight, who's the Unit 8200 officer that's running Prager University. So clearly there is. Everybody recognizes that a power vacuum has just opened up. Charlie Kirk, as we said earlier, is this towering figure. And now that he's gone, there is this huge black hole in the center of Turning Point. And so question one is, who's in charge? Erica Kirk. And, who is she? We don't know. Is she going to be a force in and of herself? And what are her values and what's her alignment? Or will she kind of be somebody who's going to be directed by the board? And then who's going to be the board? Who's going to be the money behind Turning Point? One interesting thing is they talked about this Jewish donor, one of their bigger donors who gave them $2 million, rescinded the donation. And then when Charlie died, sent the donation back in. You wonder, were assurances made? Is there sort of some renewed confidence? Maybe that was out of some sort of sympathy for the organization. But to me, it's a big question mark. But I think, of course, these forces are going to race in. And I mentioned a moment ago, Josh Hammer talked with Mark Levin the other day on the show about this. And Josh Hammer and Mark Levin have emerged as some of the loudest and most vocal pro-Israel voices, both Jewish, both super Zionist. Josh Hammer was tight with Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk told him on a phone call, apparently the week that he died, that if anybody asks about Israel, he's just going to show Josh Hammer's book. And so these are the kinds of people that are going to race in, and I think quite successfully, to try to then gatekeep that conversation. The question then, I suppose, is what role will Tucker play in the future? He's already lined up to have an event at Indiana, one of those campuses, in the coming months as part of the tour. But I think that is going to remain a battle just like it was 3 weeks ago. I think that battle is going to keep being fought. So I think it's a question mark, but the Zionists are definitely going to have an opportunity here to come in and, I think erase any doubt as to the alignment of Turning Point with Israel.
Last question for you. It's kind of ironic that right before we had you on the show, right before you were scheduled, this kind of very, I wouldn't say super pervasive, but not trivial either, accusations started being launched against you that you seem to have become captive to the state of Israel and its interests by virtue of the rejection that you've expressed of the view that Israel was behind Charlie Kirk's killing. Like, oh, look, Nick Fuentes is now running cover for Israel. He's clearly part of the Mossad. And I know that you talked about how frustrating that was. You just don't see the evidence for this conspiracy, and you're saying that. And yet, on the other hand, people are so quick to say, oh, look, Israel must have some role in these machinations. And you talked about almost like a sort of pride that you felt, kind of a happiness in seeing that the discourse has gone so far that if you don't immediately assert Israel is behind something, it creates a lot of suspicion on the part of huge numbers of people. And that clearly is a massive sea change. You see that sea change, too, in poll after poll after poll, where young people have completely abandoned Israel. And it's clear that, and this happens in every instance where an establishment faction or a power center feels threatened, they start getting increasingly desperate. What do you think is the likelihood, given that this has now all been so unleashed, unleashed in a way that just seems to build on itself, that Israel and its loyalists, with all their institutional power and all their money and all their willingness to go so far without limits, will be able to stem the tide and reverse the tide and make Americans, especially young Americans, get on board again with the pro-Israel train?
I think they have recognized that they've lost the public, and I think they recognize they're not going to get the public back the way that it used to be. I think they recognize, especially on the right wing, that nobody's going to go back to cheerleading the way that they used to be, at least for the most part. So I think their strategy is something like complacency and indifference. And I've noticed that on the right wing, what you see, for example, with somebody like Matt Walsh. In his interview with Tucker Carlson, he says, well, listen, I'm an American, so I don't really care that much about Palestine and Israel. Don't talk to me about that. I don't know anything about that. I only care about America. And to me, that is such like a deliberate, they're trying to come across as indifferent to Israel. They're trying to come across, people say this line on Twitter, they say, just let them kill each other. Who cares? Just let Israel and Palestine kill each other. And by all appearances, that looks like sort of a happy medium where you're not super pro-Israel, you're not a psycho anti-Israel, you're just really focused on America. But that belies the truth that, of course, the institutions, there's a major war being waged. Bari Weiss is going to be running CBS. Harvard now has a Jewish president. Like the war, they're in it to win it. They're taking hits, but they're still pushing and they're still moving up the battlefield here. And when people say things like, well, we just need to ignore that, they're basically telling Americans to recuse themselves from that conversation and saying we're only going to let the pro-Israel side fight these battles and advocate for their cause. And Americans are just going to kind of say, that doesn't matter. During the Iran war, Charlie Kirk himself said, everybody just turn your phones off. The world is so crazy. Everybody just pretend this isn't happening. I saw other people say, realistically, I think Oran McIntyre in his show with Tucker said, we really need to just focus on parochial concerns like the school board and things that actually affect our real lives. We don't need to concern ourselves with politics. And so if you're really being perceptive about this, the message, they know they've lost the left, although maybe they're trying to recapture people like Bari Weiss. But on the right, their message that they're pushing is this very calculated indifferentist position to just sort of say, let Israel handle everything. Let the Jewish Silicon Valley types, let them be the technocrats. They can supply the drones and the satellites and the AI and all this. You just don't concern yourselves with that. You concern yourselves with this parochial stuff and culture war issues. And that's where it's our job to agitate and say, this matters to you. You have a say in how your government operates. This is the American empire. We're citizens of it. We should wield it and control it. We should take an interest in it. So to me, that's sort of the next phase. That's going to be the toughest battle. It's not people saying you need to be a cheerleader for Israel. It's people telling you, who cares about Israel? You're the crazy one. Like you talked about that gaslighting, saying we're obsessed with Israel. We need to push back and say, no, it is our concern. It's our empire. It's our country. And actually, it does matter for our daily lives. That, to me, that's the next step in the battle.
Yeah, and it's so deceitful, that kind of like pseudo abdication, because the reality is it isn't just, money being sent for foreign wars. It's that every one of our institutions is undergoing massive radical limitations on the ability of people to express themselves freely, including at our universities that have nothing to do with protests, but what can be taught. All these hate speech codes that conservatives claim to be so opposed to and infuriated by are being expanded radically in order to protect not just Jewish people, but Israel from a wide range of critiques. So this idea of people on the right saying, I'm not on board with Israel either, I just don't care, is so deceitful, because it obscures the fact that our politics are being radically changed underneath our noses by this Israel lobby and by its loyalists in the United States that the Matt Walshes of the world are encouraging to ignore, because he wants to just somehow find this sweet middle ground where he's neither an Israel shill nor somebody who's going against Ben Shapiro and the interests that fund him. And I do think it's vital to make manifest how deceitful and false that is. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.